Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our first webinar. Thank you for coming along today. I can appreciate this is, a very challenging and uncertain time. So we're hugely grateful that you've taken the time to spend with us this morning or this afternoon. Just so we can, help you get some certainty in this really uncertain environment that we've got at the moment. So how this session is going to work is that Marjo is going to run through so we've got Marjo and May with us today. So Marjo will go through what support's available, and so while she's doing that, I ask that you please send through all of your questions. So there is a question and answer box down the bottom of your screen, so hopefully you can see that. If you are having any problems at all during the session, there is a raise your hand function, and the button should be possibly on the bottom, either bottom center or bottom left of your screen, depending on whether you are using an iPhone or a computer. So if at any point, just raise your hand and I'll get to your question. I'll chat to you and see what the problem is. So yeah, if you could just please ask your questions as we go along. We're hoping to get through all the content first and then we'll answer all your questions at the end. You won't see what other questions people have asked, but I'll be filtering through those to make sure that there's no double ups, and so we can make sure we can get through as much as we can. So we'll go through those questions at the end. But as I said earlier, this is our first webinar, so please bear with us. Hopefully we won't have any IT issues. But if we do, yeah, just send us through any feedback, use that raise your hand function, and we'll try and work on this together. I also want to just be clear, just a bit of a disclaimer that this information is general advice, so it does not take into account your personal situation. You need to consider whether the information is appropriate to your needs and seek further advice if you have more specific questions. So I think that's probably all for us to get started. So if Marjo, if you want to join on the screen there and we can get started.
Hello everyone, hopefully you can hear and see me okay, but don't hesitate to raise your hand if you can't. As Emma has mentioned, hopefully we don't have any internet problems, so hopefully I won't freeze up on your screen too often during this whole process. I also have to apologise, as you can see I'm working from my spare bedroom at home and I have dogs at home, so hopefully they don't yap too much during the session. So a lot of this stuff is obviously very recent and very new government announcements. So we're going to do our best to give you as much information as we can to let you know what is available and guide you the best way possible to get access to, what support you can get through this very difficult time. So if there's anything that I cover that you need more information on, obviously feel free to add that to the questions, and we'll try and answer as many questions as we can at the end, obviously. So firstly, I wanted to start off with what would be available for households. And so this is the $750 payment that the government are providing that I'm sure some of you have heard of in the media. And so essentially a certain number of people currently receiving benefits and support from Centrelink are going to get this $750 payment. It's going to start rolling out from the end of this month. So I imagine that will take a number of weeks for the government to allocate that payment to everyone. But if you're eligible, you'll get it automatically. There's nothing you need to do to register for that. May's about to share with us a list of people that would be eligible. So this is traditionally people that are on support payments or have concession cards from Centrelink. So things like age pension, or if you've got a Commonwealth Seniors Health Card, if you're receiving parenting payment, family tax benefit as well. So there's a list there on the screen, and like I said, there's nothing extra you need to do to register. You will just automatically get that payment. The other announcement that came out in the second support package from the government was that they'll be doing that again in July. So there'll be a second payment of $750 for people that are eligible. So watch out in your bank accounts for that if you are eligible. The other support that Centrelink is providing is based on support for individuals. So this is around the job seeker payment and for those on youth allowance. And so the first thing they're doing is they're increasing the support in the form of what they've called the coronavirus supplement. And so essentially that's an extra $550 a fortnight on top of the benefit that you're already getting. The other thing that will happen is that they are expanding access to the job seeker payment and youth allowance. And so what this is designed to do is capture all of these people affected by the coronavirus, whether that be that you've been stood down, that you've lost your job completely. And so essentially there's a lot of testing that would ordinarily happen for job seekers that would require them to pass a myriad of tests in order to be eligible. And some of those have been relaxed. So things like the asset test, things like you used to have to meet a liquid asset test. For instance, if you had some cash in the bank, they would expect you to utilize that first before being able to access these payments. So that's something that I think will help a lot of people. Like obviously there are a lot of people that are being stood down, losing their jobs completely. It also needs to cover obviously self-employed or people that are running their own business. So it has been expanded to incorporate people that fit in that bracket. And this is all about demonstrating a decline in your business income as a result of the coronavirus. And from what I understand at this stage, it's a declaration that you make that your income has been affected. Because they're trying to fast track, obviously, as many people to get the support to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, they're going to be relying on declarations. So I think what that means is that you won't necessarily need to be providing documentary evidence that your business income has declined. It will purely be a declaration, which obviously the government can come back at a later stage and look more carefully as to whether you were actually eligible if they did want to check up on you. So as I mentioned, they are trying to speed up the claim process. I believe Centrelink is getting a lot more people on their payroll to help with this. One of the things that you should be doing if you are affected at this stage, either through your business turnover going down, or you've been stood down or lost your job completely, or been put back to part-time hours because there's no full-time hours available, you need to register your intent to claim with Centrelink. That's the first thing you need to do. If you want to avoid being on the phone to Centrelink for an extended period of time, register for a MyGov account and make sure that you link it to Centrelink from there. So best to make sure that you're starting that process as soon as possible so that you can get the support you need as soon as possible. May, did you have anything further to perhaps add to that?
No, Marjo, no, not at this point. Thank
All
you.
right. Yep, great, thank you. So that's it as far as support from Centrelink for households and individuals. So I just wanted to move on to superannuation and support for retirees. So the first thing that the government has done is extended the ability for someone to access their super now without meeting the usual retirement eligibility factors. And so previously you could access super if you were going through financial hardship as well. And so they've now extended that to make sure that they're allowing people who have been affected by coronavirus, so being made redundant, your work hours reduced, or your business turnover is reduced. You do need to do this through the MyGov. So make sure you register for a MyGov account and do it directly through that. Previously, under the financial hardship option of accessing your super, you would have contacted your super fund directly. In order to get this specific coronavirus early access to your super, you do need to do it through the MyGov account. And the benefit of the changes are that this $10,000 you get will be tax-free to you. So you can access $10,000 now before the end of June, and then another $10,000 in the new financial year, so after the 1st of July. So obviously that's something to consider. Obviously there are implications associated with accessing your super early, in the sense that in terms of what that might mean for your retirement savings. So please be mindful of that and seek further support and advice around that if you're thinking of utilising this concession. The other thing that the government have done to support current retirees, so those receiving pensions from their own super monies, is that they have reduced the amount of the minimum drawdown. Now, what this is designed to do is allow the retirees to retain as much money in their super fund as possible. Given the downturn, they might want to retain as much in there as possible to allow their super fund investments to recover from the dip. And the other thing is obviously to retain, because a lot of people, to access their super, might need to sell down investments. And so, the government is allowing you to retain as much money in super as possible. So if you're thinking that you want to keep as much money in your super as possible, then I would suggest that you talk to your accountant advisor, financial planner, and have a chat to them about how you can take advantage of those concessions. So that's it in terms of households and individuals from the federal government. I'm now going to move on and talk about what's available from the federal government for the business side of things. So there's a lot of small businesses that are essentially very affected by the downturn, in terms of, we're seeing business closures, we're seeing cafes and restaurants, for instance, having to go to takeaway only. So obviously that's going to affect a lot of businesses. We've seen businesses that have specifically been disallowed to continue opening to the public. So, we've got gyms and we've got massage parlours, and I think hairdressers were originally sort of affected, and they've relaxed that a little bit, but and we are potentially heading to a full lockdown, and so obviously there's a lot of businesses affected, and we want to advise you on what support is available to you at the moment. So the first thing I want to cover off on is what the government are calling business cash flow support. So what this is essentially designed to do is those that are employing, it's designed to allow them to continue for as long as possible to keep their staff on the payroll. I note that this would also cover businesses where you operate through a company or a trust and you're paying yourself a wage. So essentially, you don't actually need to do anything to register for this support. If you are a registered, employer and paying wages and reporting those wages to the tax office on your business activity statement, you'll automatically get these entitlements at the time that you lodge the relevant business activity statements. So what is that worth to your business? It's worth essentially a minimum of 2 lots of $10,000. So the first amount of $10,000 minimum payment will come to you with the lodgement of that March business activity statement. And so even if you don't have any tax that you've withheld from employee wages, you're still going to get the minimum of that $10,000. So how are you going to get the $10,000? Well, it's not going to come to you as a cash payment, as much as that the naming that the government have used falsely indicates that they might be sending you $10,000 cash to your bank. No, what's going to happen is it's actually going to go onto your what's known as your integrated client account. So your account with the tax office that records your GST and your pay-as-you-go withholding debts. And so they'll put a $10,000 credit there as a minimum at the first time that you lodge the relevant business activity statement, which is your March quarter. And essentially, if that is more than the pay-as-you-go withholding that you owe for that quarter. The balance will go against your GST for that quarter. And then if there's anything left over, the tax office are going to refund the difference. So obviously a minimum of 20,000 to your business over the next few months is going to make a big difference to the cash flow in your business. Recognizing at the same time, obviously, if your business has been seriously affected, this is not, I guess, not the bailout that businesses might have been hoping for. One of the things to note was in the second round, the tax office announced that they would, the government announced that they would also extend this to not-for-profits and charities. So they originally were excluded, they're now included. They don't need to do anything extra to register. It's all going to come on the lodgement of the relevant BASs and all via the ATO integrated client account. May, did you have anything further to add to any of that?
Sorry, Marjo, did you mention the eligibility? So it is designed for small and medium enterprises. So
yes.
Businesses with a turnover, so charities 50 million, and that's also the same for businesses. Is that correct, Marjo?
Yes, yes, I believe that's correct. Let me just have a quick look at my notes here.
Yes, I've just found it too. So there is as usual, there's always the devil in the detail with these things. So you will need to check your eligibility. There's things like you must have held an ABN for businesses on the 12th of March 2020. You must have had a turnover of less than 50 million. And this can be aggregated if you've got a number of businesses that you're running. And then you must have had payments to employees over that time, so things like salary and wages. So if it's a little bit more difficult for brand new businesses that maybe haven't got that history and previous BASs lodged. So if you're unsure whether you are eligible, best to always check so you know what might be coming your way over this next sort of 3 and 6 months.
Perfect, thank you for that, May. Sorry, you can probably hear my dogs barking in the background. They'll calm down shortly, I'm sure. So the next thing I quickly wanted to cover was just there's some support out there for businesses that have apprentices and trainees on their payroll. So essentially, once again, this is in line with the government trying to keep as many employees on the payroll as possible. I believe if you have a trainee or apprentice through one of those job agencies, then they will provide any entitlement onto you. So they'll take care of that for you. But if you are directly employing the apprentice or the trainee, there is actually a registration process available. So you'll need to follow the links on our website, which will direct you to the location where you register. I believe it doesn't start until April, so you've got a bit of time, but obviously with everything right now, I imagine everything's going to take a little bit longer than the usual time frame. So please, if you have trainees and apprentices, make sure you look into that as soon as you can. The next thing that will benefit some businesses is the changes to the instant asset write-off rules. And also there's some accelerated depreciation rules that have come about. So this will be challenging in the sense that with the uncertainty that exists right now, I imagine a lot of businesses will be trying to spend as little as possible. But rest assured that if you are going to make some capital investments in your business, that there's some very generous concessions out there. So with the instant asset write-off, prior to this announcement, the threshold was $30,000 would get you an immediate deduction. They've now raised that to $150,000. The other thing they've done is they've allowed businesses with aggregate turnover of less than 500 million to access that concession. So if you think about that in practical sense, if your business needs a new ute and it's going to cost you $50,000 to get yourself the latest Triton, then you're going to get an immediate deduction for that against any income that your business has earned. Once again, the challenge obviously in this difficult time is that you might not need the deduction, you might not be willing to spend the money, but the concession is there if you choose to.
Excuse me, a common question often is, does the asset need to be new? And not under these rules, no. It can be a second-hand asset, but it's the cost that's important, so it must be less than 150,000.
Yeah, thanks, May. The other thing that they have done is introduced a new accelerated depreciation deduction. And so, for instance, if a business was going to spend more than 150,000 on a new piece of equipment for the business, then there's a generous concession that will allow you to have an immediate deduction for more than 50%. And the thing to note with that one is that I believe that's only available for new assets, whereas the immediate write-off would be available, for instance, if we use the Triton Ute example, it's going to be available whether you're buying a new Triton Ute or a second-hand Triton Ute. This accelerated depreciation is for new assets. And so be mindful of, if you're trying to access that concession, obviously it does need to be brand new. The remaining 50% of the cost of the asset then just gets depreciated under the usual depreciation rules. Anything further to add to that, May?
No, Marjo, thank you.
Okay, great. So something just to mention quickly, they've relaxed the rules a little bit around what can happen for businesses that are struggling financially. So when businesses are struggling financially, they might get demand notices from some of their suppliers. And also in terms of ATO debts, the tax office can start to make directors of companies personally liable and things like that. So one of the things that's been introduced on a temporary basis in this difficult time is that they've relaxed the rules around that. So essentially, if you're still a viable business and we just need to get through this difficult stage, then this will benefit you because it will just give you a bit of breathing room, I suppose. So if you've got concerns about the tax office chasing you or creditors chasing you, then obviously have a read of this and contact us for further support around that. The other thing that is going to be helpful for businesses in this difficult time is the extra support that the government is providing around businesses borrowing money. As usual, for any business that's borrowing money, you need to consider what that looks like in terms of your long-term plan for the business, because this is not, they're loans that are going to need to be repaid, obviously. So you need to factor that into your long-term plans for the business. And also, if you've got borrowing obligations at the moment, like equipment, vehicle finances, or existing business loans that you're asking your financier to give you some deferrals, you need to obviously factor that into your long-term plan as well, because obviously there'll need to be either catch-up payments, or obviously the interest will accumulate, or it might stretch out the term of the loan. And so they're all things that you need to factor into the long-term planning for the business. So one of the new things the government has done is that they are going to provide guarantees for business loans, 50% guarantee. We're talking about up to 250,000 of a loan, and then there's generous concessions in terms of there's a bit of a repayment holiday. So these are not loans that the government is directly issuing. You do need to go through a lender. I believe the larger lenders are already on board with this. And essentially you will need to go through an application process with a lender. So one of the things to bear in mind, if this is one of the paths you choose to go down, then obviously things like, have you got your BASs up to date? Have you got your tax returns up to date? They're all things that lenders ask for in assessing a finance application. So if you're already thinking in the back of your mind now, yep, that's something I'm going to look into, best to check in with your accountant and make sure that if they're not already up to date, that work is being done promptly to get those up to date for you.
Marjo, just to be clear, this government guarantee loan is for new loans only. It doesn't apply to existing loans. Yeah. And each bank has has something slightly different on offer. So best thing to do is engage with your bank, ask them what they're offering, because each bank is slightly different in what they're coming to the party, in terms of some of them been offering interest rate concessions, and different things within this whole broader scheme.
Thanks, May.
Right.
The other thing that will be helpful during this difficult time is that the government are essentially relaxing the rules around responsible lending. So for those that have borrowed in the last 6 to 12 months, you'll notice that it's actually been more difficult. The banks are doing more checks. They're asking for more information from you. You know, it's been a lot more difficult to get some borrowing across the line, essentially. And so one of the things that has happened is they're relaxing those rules a little bit, with the intention that hopefully some of these loans can be fast tracked and not be bogged down, I guess, in the red tape that borrowing money has tended to become over the last little while. The other thing which I've mentioned briefly is obviously if you've got existing finances and you're really struggling to meet those obligations, obviously have a chat to your lender and make sure that you are not defaulting. Contact them early enough that you can start the conversation with them. The other thing to cover quickly is just QRider now have business support loans. So essentially this is the government providing loans. And so there's low interest loans up to 250,000. The first year is interest free. They're calling it carry on finance. So essentially it's designed to keep businesses staff on the payroll and just to help you out with a bit of a cash flow funding, I suppose. So at the moment, they're taking expressions of interest. So
I can add to that.
Yes.
There is something that I lodged an expression of interest just so I'd be on the mailing list. They have recently, I think it was yesterday, come out. So you can go onto their website now and you can actually lodge an application. Just to be very clear, this loan is for Queensland businesses. It's part of the Queensland government's support package. Each state government has released their own support package, which ranges from concessions to fees for tourism operators to payroll tax relief. That's been one of the biggest ones for businesses. And then the Queensland one happens to incorporate this loan through QRider, which is a state government department. So every state will have their own offer. So this part that we're talking about now is only for Queensland businesses.
And I'll be chatting briefly about the state government package, May, so I'll cover some of those extra concessions.
Okay, thank you.
So just to finish off on the business side of things, in terms of what the federal government is offering, the tax office are essentially going to be, I guess, relaxing a little bit in terms of lodgement and payment obligations. So, you know, if the coronavirus has affected you to the point where, you know, you can't meet your payment obligations with the tax office, obviously talk to them as soon as possible. But so far already with the work that we've been doing with our clients, we've noticed that they're being very generous in that regard. So make sure you reach out early enough. Don't leave it till the last minute. And yeah, I think you'll find that the tax office are being very supportive. So lastly, I just wanted to cover off on the state government package that's on offer at present. So obviously, as May mentioned, every state is doing slightly different for their residents, and the Queensland government, I believe, have been very generous. So one of the things they've done is for businesses paying payroll tax, they've offered relief there. So different relief for small to medium businesses versus large businesses. But essentially, the last 2 months of payroll tax, they're refunding. And depending on whether you're small, medium or large, they're giving either an exemption for another few months or a deferral for another few months. So if your business is paying payroll tax, obviously take a look at those rules and make sure you're getting those concessions there, because that's obviously going to make a big difference to your business cash flow. The other thing is some electricity rebates. So for businesses, $500 and for households, $200. I believe there's nothing you need to do there to register for that. I believe that you will just notice that come off the next bill that your provider will send you. Just having a quick look. May, is there anything else you can think of there?
The only comment I'd make is there has been discussions about a third round of federal government support. There's probably, to be honest, some areas that are still have been left out with many of these support packages, and there's certainly the second one was a significant increase from the first one. So keep yourselves informed as much as possible, because I expect, depending on what happens, there will be further announcements, and we just have to watch this space, really.
Essentially, that's all that I had to share in terms of all that information. As I said, it's designed for us to let you know what's out there and to make sure that you guys are taking steps towards accessing the support that's available at the moment. Obviously, this is a constantly changing situation, so we encourage everyone to be really active in keeping up to date in terms of what's available for you.
Cool. So we've had some really good questions come through. So the first one here, could you please clarify that the job seeker allowance is based on household income, not individual income? So someone who has their own business who's been forced to close will not receive the payment if their partner is earning over the income threshold.
That's correct. So one of the things that, although they did relax some of the other things around those supports available, like the assets test and the liquidity weighting test, which is about have you got enough money in the bank right now to support you. They've relaxed those, but unfortunately at this stage, from what we can tell, they have done nothing to change the partner's income test. And so you'll be income tested in the sense that if you've been cut back to part-time hours, or your business income has reduced but not completely disappeared, and also what your spouse's income is. So I believe the threshold is $994 a fortnight. Once your spouse earns over that, your benefit will start reducing, and similar to if that's what you were earning from your part-time work or your business. So those two income tests essentially still at play there.
Okay, so another one I heard on social media, they said, sorry, that you are ineligible for the job seeker payment if your business didn't exist before July 2017. Is there any merit to that? Interesting one.
I do not know the answer to that question. For the one, for the business cash flow boost, there are some timing criteria around that payment. So it's quite possible that there would be, because I guess what the government are trying to do is to stop people manipulating their circumstances to be eligible for support they wouldn't have otherwise been eligible for. So while I don't know the exact answer to that, it's a good question and definitely something worth looking into further.
Yep. Do you know if these payments will be backdated? So in terms of the job seeker?
So I believe it's really important, for instance, if you've lost your job already, or if your hours have declined already, or if your business income has reduced significantly, that you register an intent to claim, because I believe that's the date from which you will be eligible to start getting payments. I note that the extra $550 a fortnight that all of these support payments will increase by only starts later in April, but that doesn't stop you registering now. So if you're eligible now, you're in a position where you've lost your job or something, lodge your intent to claim, because that's sort of the date that they'll start paying from. And then that gives you time to prove your identity to Centrelink and get any other supporting documents in place.
Yeah, and you can just lodge that intent to claim on MyGov, so not having to line up at Centrelink.
Correct.
Yeah. So the next question, if you were paid a wage from your company and due to the loss of income, you can no longer afford to pay that, should you register your intent to claim with Centrelink and possibly job seeker allowance?
I would suggest that that's definitely what you will have to do. There's, I can't imagine what other option would be available to you. If you've got no money coming in, then obviously your intention should be to lodge an intent to claim with Centrelink through the MyGov as soon as possible. Obviously, if your business has no cash flow there to continue paying your wage, you know, that support is there for that reason.
And to clarify, it doesn't matter if we are a company, trust, sole trader, everyone's eligible for that pay-as-you-go withholding payment, provided they're registered and doing the pay-as-you-go, like actually paying wages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the only thing that I would note again there is that there are what we would call anti-avoidance provisions worded into that, in the sense that if you haven't previously been paying staff wages or yourself wages, you shouldn't be manipulating your circumstances to get a concession that you wouldn't otherwise have been entitled to. So it's designed to support existing employers and existing businesses paying wages either to unrelated staff or themselves. And so just be mindful of that. Best to talk to your advisor, your accountant, around that and what that might mean for your business.
Yeah. So if I'm paying wages to my employee, but I'm not withholding any tax, am I still eligible for this payment?
Yes. So provided you are paying a wage that you're declaring on your business activity statement, then you'll be eligible for that minimum amount of $10,000 in the first round and then another $10,000 in the second. And so you'll get a minimum of $20,000 worth of support, regardless of whether you're withholding any tax from either wages paying to yourself or wages paying to your staff.
Okay, great. If I'm on a payment arrangement for a previous VAT, do I need to have this paid and up to date before the government will pay the pay-as-you-go withholding support into my integrated client account?
I believe that they will pay into your integrated client account based on the lodgement of the relevant activity statement. It won't be held up if you have existing debt, but what will happen is it will offset that existing debt. So if that existing debt is more than the credit that you are allocated on your integrated client account, obviously you're not going to get an additional refund of that amount. It's going to offset your existing debts.
Okay. But then, and what happens if, say you get paid the minimum 10,000 and the pay-as-you-go withholding the GST obligations have been taken out? Is the remainder paid to you as cash, or does it sit on your integrated client account as a credit?
No, it will be refunded to the bank details that the ATO have on their file. It might be worthwhile, if you anticipate that you will be getting refunded an excess amount, that you check that the tax office have your relevant bank details, because if you're not historically been entitled to refunds, they may not have your correct bank details on file. So that's something worth checking yourself, or it's something that your advisor or accountant can check for you quite quickly via the tax agent portal.
So what about if, so again, with the 10,000 minimum, say I received that and I have a tax debt, would the ATO take what's left over of that 10,000 payment and apply it against my tax debt, or just sit on the integrated client account?
That's a great question. So I think the thing to be mindful of is that this is related to your business entity. So for instance, if you're trading through a company or a trust or a partnership and you have personal tax debts, they won't be withholding it and offsetting it against any personal tax debts, because that's a separate entity. However, if you were a sole trader getting this amount and you had an income tax debt, I'm going to guess that they will retain it and offset it against that. May, do you have any further thoughts on that?
Marjo, that's a really good question. I've been reading quite a lot of debate about that over the weekend. It is a bit unclear at this point whether they will allow businesses who are on a payment arrangement to maintain that and they will refund the difference.
Okay.
Reading the ATO website now, and it is a little unclear. It would indicate at this point that they will apply any credit against other liabilities that are sitting on that business account. But I must admit, the reading I was doing on the weekend, there did seem to be a lot of different opinions about that. So that might be something we need to keep an eye on and have a further look into. Because they have said, there was an announcement from the ATO that they do appreciate that businesses need this cash now. And I felt that there was something from one of the commissioners that said that they would consider if there was payment arrangements in place and they were being adhered to, that businesses may still be able to access this cash flow boost now. So I'm sorry, I don't know anything further on that at this point.
So now talking about the instant asset write-off. So we've got someone that hasn't purchased any big assets before, so they're unfamiliar with what that is and what accelerated depreciation is.
Great question. So essentially, similar to other business deductions such as paying your Telstra bill or paying your electricity bill or putting fuel in a work vehicle, essentially your business earns its income, so it has, you know, gross sales from customers, and from that we would deduct legitimate business expenses such as those I've just mentioned. One of the deductions a business is entitled to is depreciation. And so historically, before these accelerated depreciation rules came about, for instance, if you bought that new work ute that I was talking about earlier, you would get a deduction for the full cost of that ute over the anticipated life of it. So for instance, if off the top of my head, I'm thinking it's 8 years for a ute. And so you get a deduction for the purchase price of that ute over an 8-year period against your business income. So the changes have been made to accelerate that depreciation. So for instance, if you buy this new work ute for $50,000, that becomes an immediate deduction in the year that you buy that ute. And so that will come directly off your gross business income in the same way that paying any of your other bills do, like your Telstra, your electricity, those sorts of things. And so for some businesses, that can be quite a generous concession that can save them thousands of dollars in tax. The challenging thing right now will be if everyone's experiencing a downturn, then you may not have enough profit there to offset that significant deduction. So that's something to be mindful of. If you need that new ute, great, go and do it. But if you're thinking about doing it purely for the tax benefit you think the business might obtain, it's definitely worth talking to your advisor, your accountant first, because it may be that your business doesn't need the deduction. May, can you add anything further to clarify that? Or
No, that's great advice, Marjo. I think I always have a rule that we should never do anything just purely for tax purposes. So, you know, if there's businesses out there that, number one, need certain equipment items and therefore can take advantage of these concessions, then absolutely it's quite significant to have 100% deduction for assets above up to 150,000. But I've seen many businesses in the past that get very caught up in doing things purely for tax reasons. And these things have significant cash flow implications. So it's worthwhile. It's got to be considered as part of an overall, you know, do I even have a tax liability? Do I have the cash flow, etc. But definitely they are fairly significant benefits.
Sure. So a question about the loans and the rules being relaxed around lending. What's our thoughts on, do we think it's a great idea or do we think it's a bit risky long term?
Do you want me to chime in, Marjo?
Sure.
Personally, it does concern me because I think that banks, once things get going again, it can catch a lot of businesses out if they've deferred payments, and there is an element of just pushing pain to a future time. However, I also believe, you know, from Anna Bly's press conference Friday a week ago, she did say that the banks were working very hard to support businesses. So I think it's something we should all exercise with caution, but you should definitely engage with your bank and at least seek information to understand what's out there. Because on the same token, it's extremely important right now to preserve cash flow. And maybe one option, if you had a number of loans, but one option might be to simply put payments on hold for equipment finance or something, rather than pushing payments out over all of your loans. It might be just what can have the greatest cash flow impact right now, and that may not be equipment finance, it might be a term loan. But what's important for businesses right now is therefore to really think about how they can be agile and creative in how that they can redeploy that cash for better purposes. Yes, it definitely is about survival, but it's also about repositioning for businesses. And this is something then, if that cash can be redeployed to producing and delivering new services, then it's definitely something that I think can be very helpful, but I would be cautious about it personally.
And would you agree, May, that the banks are still going to be looking at, is your business going to be viable after the coronavirus situation settles down? Because obviously they're still going to be looking at the long-term stability of your business and your ability to repay the debt in the long term. So it will be a matter of proving to the bank that you have a viable business after the dust settles on all of this. You know, and for instance, right now, some cafes and restaurants are probably doing it tough, and it would be difficult to know and to demonstrate that you're going to be a viable business out the other end of this, you know, this disaster that we're facing. So, yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I always think better to be informed. So again, that's why I say engage with your bank, understand what's out there. For instance, I received an email from my bank. There's even concessions. There's an interest rate reduction, which often, you know, will allow businesses to keep up to date with their payments, but just mean that the interest rate comes back a little bit. So there's certainly plenty of options available. There's not just extra lending. They can redesign your package. Little things even like merchant terminal rental fee waivers for a few months, which can help some of these retail businesses. So understand what your options are.
Yeah, I'd agree. So another question was just when we put the recording on our website, can we make sure, we're asked if we can provide the links to any documents we've referred to. So we'll definitely do that. But that's all the questions we have. We did have one just asking about the process for sole traders, but I'm not sure exactly which part that was in relation to. So we'll find that out and contact you directly to be able to answer that one. So if anyone didn't have any more questions, there's no further comments that May or Madhu you had, or?
No, Emma, except were you going to mention the website and all the resources on there as well? Just
yeah, absolutely. So we also just wanted to mention that we're trying to get our newsletter out quite regularly. So whenever anything changes, we want to make sure that you guys are all up to date. So if you wanted to make sure that you subscribe to that, so you'll always be up to date with all the current information. And so you can just do that on our website here in the contact us page. So just down the bottom, you can subscribe to our newsletter there. Also, if you don't have our email addresses, you're welcome to contact us via this page. Otherwise, they are you know, our phone number and our info email address there. Otherwise, we are keeping our LinkedIn and Facebook pages up to date. So if you wanted to go over and follow us on there, you'll have access to some timely information. So we're trying to keep on top of that. But also, if you have any questions at all at any time, just give us a call, reach out. We're more than happy to help. If you have any more questions about this webinar that you just might think on in the next 24 hours or so, just send us an email and we'll get to them next week. Otherwise, yeah, we really appreciate that you guys came today and listened in and asked some really good questions. So I hope that was really helpful and provided some clarity and, helps you go forward and make some decisions. If you need some help in deciding what's right for you, just let us know and we'll go from there.
Emma, we are considering running another one of these webinars. I seem to have wrangled the support of a wonderful HR person that I know, who hopefully next week we can coordinate, probably similar time on Friday, a Q&A with a really amazing HR person. So there's a lot of uncertainty out there with businesses as to what their obligations are. And again, rolling on from that theme of being informed and knowing what your rights and obligations are, I think is absolutely what we all need to do as business owners at this point. So we're hoping to run another one of these, but if you have any feedback, this is our, as Emma said, this is our first Q&A. We would love to hear it. If there's anything else that you would like to see on these, we're all ears. We are doing our absolute best, like you all are, to help support each other. These are certainly really uncertain times, and so we would really like to be able to support as many businesses as we can. So welcome to pass on any feedback. We would love to hear it. And thank you to my co-panelists, Marjo and Emma. You've done an amazing job, and you should be really proud of yourselves. So thank you so much.
Thank you. The question has been clarified now. It was just, is it only sole traders able to apply for job seeker, or is it, any individual, the director of a company or something like that?
Yeah. So if you operate your business through a company or a trust, and obviously the business has been affected to the point where it can no longer provide you with the cash support that you would normally have in the form of either a wage or drawings from the business, then I believe you will be eligible in the same way that sole traders and just people that are currently working as employees for other businesses are.
Yep. Great. Thank you for that. I think that should be every question answered. But as I said, reach out if you've got any more, because I'm sure you'll think about this over the next 24 hours or so, and things might pop into your head. So happy to help. We're here if you need. Great. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.